The first time Rex Dalton knocked on the door of the Galactic Syndicate, the entire planet laughed. Not just the gangsters inside, not just the guards standing at the gates with plasma rifles, but the whole damn planet seemed to rumble with the kind of laughter that says you have walked into the wrong neighborhood with the wrong haircut and the wrong smile. And yet there he stood, a human no taller than 6 feet, coat covered in coffee stains, holding nothing but a battered data pad full of numbers. They called him stupid. They called him weak. They called him dead before sunset. But Rex had something they did not count on. He had a sense of humor, a bad temper, and a very real belief that if someone owed you money, the only polite thing to do was to pay up. It was the sort of belief that had gotten him into trouble back home, and the kind that would get him killed in the stars. Still, his first words to the alien gangster set the tone for everything to follow. "Pay up," he said, "or I start breaking intergalactic knees." Of course, nobody paid attention to the human at first. To them, Earthlings were the accountants of the galaxy, useful for pushing numbers around but never for swinging fists. The Syndicate had borrowed heavy resources from Earth years ago, enough raw material to build fleets and colonies, and then when it came time to pay, they simply erased the records with a smug grin. A few bribes here, a forged ledger there, and suddenly the most powerful criminal organization in 3 quadrants was debt-free. At least they thought they were. Humanity, tired of being ignored, sent Rex Dalton, a man no one in their right mind would have hired if there had been any better choice. He was a washed-up ex-detective, fired for punching a superior officer in the face during a budget hearing. He had a record longer than his resume, a ship that leaked more fuel than it burned, and a voice that could turn any polite conversation into a bar fight. But he was also the kind of man who never let go of a case once it was in his hands, and that made him dangerous. The journey to the Syndicate's home world was an adventure in humiliation. Rex's ship, a relic held together with duct tape and curses, barely made it past the moon. He had to bribe a mechanic with the promise of an unpaid bar tab to get his engines fixed. By the time he landed, his landing gear collapsed and dumped him nose first into the Syndicate's docking bay. The guards nearly choked laughing as they dragged him out. A few even placed bets on how quickly he would be vaporized. Rex dusted himself off, straightened his coat, and announced with a grin that he was here to collect on behalf of humanity. They roared with laughter, pointing their rifles at his chest, but something about the stubborn glint in his eyes made them hesitate before pulling the trigger. Inside, the Syndicate's headquarters was less a palace and more a grotesque museum of crime. Towers of stolen art lined the halls, statues melted from rare minerals stood beside cages filled with strange alien creatures. The stench of burned tobacco and exotic meat filled the air. At the center, lounging on a throne carved from the bones of some forgotten beast, sat Don Crocker, the leader of the Syndicate. He was massive, his body a mountain of slimy folds and twitching antennae, with eyes like pools of acid. He puffed on a glowing cigar and smiled at Rex as if the human were a small joke delivered too late in the evening. "And who are you?" the Don asked in a voice that gurgled like boiling tar. Rex introduced himself as the man who had come to collect. Crocker's laughter shook the walls. The meeting lasted all of 5 minutes. Crocker listened to Rex's demand, nodded thoughtfully, and then with a flick of one bloated finger ordered his guards to throw the human into orbit. They tied him to a junk shuttle full of burning trash and launched him into space, expecting him to die a slow, humiliating death as he drifted among garbage until oxygen ran out. It was the kind of execution they reserved for pests who were not worth a bullet. But Rex Dalton was not the kind to die politely. The moment the shuttle cleared atmosphere, he kicked loose from his restraints, rerouted the failing thrusters, and hurled himself free just as the trash shuttle exploded. He crash-landed onto a derelict freighter, broken ribs screaming in protest, but alive. He laughed through the pain, muttering that it would take more than a giant slug with bad breath to keep him down. Word of his survival spread faster than plasma fire. The Syndicate had failed to kill a human. Worse, that human was still demanding payment. For the first time in decades, the Syndicate felt mocked. Rex Dalton had not only survived their insult, he had turned it into a louder knock on their door. Back on his wreck of a ship, patched together with stolen wires and hope, Rex recorded a message and sent it across the Syndicate's communication network. It was short, sharp, and every gangster who heard it knew it for what it was. "You owe humanity," Rex said. "You pay humanity. And if you don't, I'm coming back to collect with interest." The Syndicate laughed again, but this time there was an edge of unease. Rex was reckless, yes, but recklessness in the hands of a stubborn man was more dangerous than a fleet of battleships. He had nothing to lose, no government leash tight enough to choke him, and a grudge sharp enough to cut through lies. The Don ordered his lieutenants to keep an eye on him, convinced he would burn himself out before causing real damage. But Rex had already set his mind. He was not just after money. He was after something bigger. Respect. Humanity's place in the galaxy had been a joke for too long. If the gangsters thought they could walk away from debts, Rex was ready to remind them what it felt like when humans came knocking. That night, lying on the floor of his ship with blood still drying on his shirt, Rex thought about why he had taken the job. Sure, there was a promise of payment. Enough credits to buy a real ship, maybe even retire. But beneath that, there was the memory of his father back on Earth, a man who had died working himself to the bone in factories while the Syndicate grew fat on unpaid loans. His father used to say that debts are chains, and those who refuse to pay are thieves wearing crowns. Rex hated thieves. He hated crowns even more. He lit a cigarette, coughed on the smoke, and swore to himself that no matter how far this debt chase took him, he would see it through to the end. In the dark, the hook tightened. The Syndicate believed they had swatted away a fly. Instead, they had just handed the fly a reason to sting. And in the great wide galaxy, no one feared a human with a clipboard and a smile. But everyone would learn to fear a human with nothing left to lose. Rex Dalton had always believed that numbers never lied, but in the galaxy, numbers were like knives. In the right hands they cut through steel, and in the wrong ones they disappeared into shadows. He sat hunched over the battered datapad on his ship, staring at the Syndicate's records. They were pristine, too pristine. Billions of credits and loans, erased with the elegance of a surgeon and the arrogance of a thief. Someone had not only wiped the debts but done it in a way that made it look legal. That meant inside help. The gangsters were good, but they were not that good. Somewhere in the human government, someone was cooking the books. Rex felt the sour taste of betrayal on his tongue, the kind that came from realizing the people who hired him might be the very ones who wanted him to fail. The discovery did not make his job easier. It made it impossible. If the debt had been hidden at both ends, he could not simply wave around his datapad and demand payment. He needed proof, and proof meant finding someone who could see through the Syndicate's smoke screen. There was only one person he knew crazy enough to dig into gangster files and still laugh about it. Mira. The name alone made Rex groan. Mira was a data thief, a woman who had once hacked an entire police precinct just to change her birthday so she could skip paying taxes. She owed him 3 favors. Technically 4, but she would argue the last one until the stars collapsed. He hated the idea of calling her, but desperate men did not get to be choosy. Tracking her down meant heading to the nearest free station, a place where traitors, smugglers, and thieves rubbed shoulders like family at a dysfunctional reunion. The station spun lazily in orbit around a red dwarf, its hull scarred by battles and patched with scrap. As Rex walked through the docking bay, the familiar stench of unwashed bodies, cheap liquor, and machine oil hit him like a slap. Nobody here cared about debts or politics. They cared about survival, and survival was a currency paid in secrets and blood. He found Mira in the corner of a rundown cantina, hunched over a holographic deck of cards that shuffled itself every time someone tried to cheat. She spotted him instantly, her sharp grin cutting across her face like a blade. "Well, if it isn't Rex Dalton," she said, raising her glass. "I thought you'd be floating in trash by now." He gave her a half-smile and slid into the seat opposite her. "Not for lack of trying," he muttered. "The Syndicate threw me out, but I came back. I need your help." Mira laughed, shaking her head. "You always need my help, Rex. That's why you keep me on speed dial. What's in it for me this time?" Rex pulled out his data pad and dropped it on the table. Humanity's future, he said flatly. That, and I'll erase one of the favors you owe me. Myra's grin widened. Humanity's future sounds boring. But favors, those I collect like jewelry. Fine. What do you want? He told her about the debt, the missing records, and the possibility of human government betrayal. For a moment, Mira looked genuinely interested. Then she frowned, fingers tapping across her own device. Star cores, she muttered. The Syndicate has been smuggling them for months. Dangerous stuff. They use them to power weapons, but the real money is in the black market. Whoever controls the star cores controls entire fleets. Rex felt his stomach tighten. If the debts had been covered up, maybe it wasn't about money at all. Maybe humanity had been used to fund a weapon they could never control. Mira leaned forward, her voice low. I can trace the data for you, but it won't be pretty. They'll know someone's digging. Rex sighed and ordered a drink. It was always the same with Mira. You wanted her help, you paid for it in sleepless nights and half-burned ships. As they spoke, a group of Syndicate thugs walked into the cantina. Big reptilian brutes with shoulders like cliffs and claws that could cut through steel. They spotted Rex almost instantly and grinned. Mira swore under her breath. You always bring the party with you, Dalton. The thugs moved closer, surrounding their table. One leaned down, hissing in a language Rex barely understood. He caught only 2 words. Debt collector. Rex smiled and raised his glass. That's me, he said cheerfully. Would you like to settle your account now? The fight broke out fast and stupid. One thug lunged, Rex threw his drink in the alien's face, and suddenly chairs were flying. Mira ducked behind the table, swearing at him between bursts of laughter. Rex, you idiot, you're going to get us both killed. He swung a chair into another thug's knees, sending the brute sprawling into a barrel of quantum beer. The barrel cracked open and spilled its glowing contents across the floor. Within seconds, the liquid reacted with the air and burst into a cloud of sparkling foam that clung to everything like glue. Thugs slipped, curses filled the room, and Rex somehow emerged standing, dripping in foam but alive. The cantina roared with laughter, and Rex raised his arms as if taking a bow. The Syndicate would not laugh forever. Later that night, a message came through his ship's comms. It was short, cruel, and perfectly clear. Humans don't collect debts, it said. Humans become debts. It was a promise, and Rex knew exactly what it meant. The Syndicate planned to turn him into an example, maybe even sell him as a slave. He lit a cigarette, blowing smoke at the cracked ceiling of his cabin. They were mocking him, daring him to try again. And that was exactly what he planned to do. Mira showed up at his ship an hour later with files in hand. She was grinning, but her eyes were sharp. I found something, she said. They didn't just erase the debt. They moved it. It's buried under shipments of star cores, disguised as transport fees. Someone in your government is approving the transfers. Rex took the files and scanned them, his jaw tightening. That was the confirmation he dreaded. If the government was in on it, he was not just fighting gangsters. He was fighting his own people too. Mira leaned against the wall, arms folded. So what's the plan now, Collector? Rex looked up at her, his eyes hard but his smile defiant. Same as always. Knock louder. The danger was clear, but so was the path. The Syndicate had drawn a line, and Rex had just stepped over it. He knew Mira would betray him if it suited her, but he also knew she enjoyed the chaos too much to walk away now. As his ship rumbled to life, Rex thought about the message they had sent him. Humans become debts. He muttered under his breath, more to himself than to Mira. Maybe. But I'm the kind of debt you can't pay off, and the interest will break you. And with that, they lifted off into the dark, heading straight back toward the lion's den. This time Rex was not coming with numbers alone. He was coming with fire in his chest, and the galaxy would learn soon enough what it meant when a human knocked twice. Rex Dalton did not like clocks, but he hated deadlines. Deadlines meant someone else was controlling the game, and Rex had never been good at playing by rules written by others. The message from the human government came through his ship's crackling comms just as he and Mira were finishing a miserable breakfast of dried protein squares and bitter coffee. The voice on the line was smooth, rehearsed, and cold. 72 hours, it said. You have 72 hours to collect what is owed or you will not be allowed back. Do not fail us again. The transmission ended before Rex could reply. Mira smirked, sipping her coffee with exaggerated calm. Nothing like a friendly reminder that your own people will hang you if you screw up, she said. Rex grunted, more irritated by the government's arrogance than by the threat itself. They were treating him like a pawn, not realizing pawns sometimes flipped the board. He spent the next few hours scouring the files Mira had stolen. The debts were buried under layers of forged contracts and false transfers, all carefully tied to shipments of star cores. Star cores were the syndicate's new gold rush, illegal and priceless, the kind of thing that turned criminals into kings. Every shipment had been rubber-stamped by someone high up in the human government. That meant no matter how much proof Rex collected, the syndicate could always point to Earth as their partner. Humanity had sold itself cheap, and Rex was the unlucky man sent to drag the truth out of the muck. Mira watched him work with an amused expression, her voice dripping sarcasm as she offered advice. You know, Dalton, she said, sometimes debts don't get collected. Sometimes you just walk away before you lose your shirt and your skin. Rex shot her a look sharp enough to silence her. Walking away was not in his nature. The real problem was that Mira was not entirely trustworthy. Rex knew it the way he knew the ship's engine would stall at least once every trip. It was not a question of if she would betray him but when. And sure enough, the moment they set course for the syndicate's inner systems, Rex felt the shift in the air. Mira had been too quiet, too agreeable. She excused herself to the comms room with the excuse of double-checking a data trail. When Rex checked on her, she was gone. Not gone from the ship, but gone in the way of loyalty. She had sent out a ping, a carefully coded message to the syndicate letting them know Rex's exact location. He stood in the doorway, staring at her as she turned, feigning surprise. Rex, she said, I can explain? He shook his head slowly, not raising his voice. Don't bother. Just tell me one thing. How much did they offer you? She hesitated, then whispered, safety. They offered me safety. For a moment he almost laughed. Mira, who had survived half the galaxy's prisons and conned the other half, selling him out for the promise of safety. He wanted to be angry, but he could not. He understood. Fear made people do stupid things. Still, he had to act fast. Instead of throwing her out, he played along. He let her think her betrayal was complete. What Mira did not know was that he had slipped a tracking device into the very message she had sent. Her betrayal was now his bait. He leaned close to her and whispered, You just gave me a way in. She looked confused, but he did not explain further. The syndicate would expect him now, but that was fine. Sometimes the best way to catch thieves was to walk right into their den and make them think they had won. The den was a palace of nightmares. Don Crocker's stronghold sat on the blackened surface of a volcanic moon, its towers glowing faint red from the heat below. As Rex's ship approached, escorts flanked them, bristling with weapons. The guards escorted them inside, where Rex was marched straight to the throne room. Mira walked beside him, her face pale but unreadable. Don Crocker greeted them with the smug satisfaction of a predator who thought the prey had finally limped home. The slug-like monster puffed on his glowing cigar and rumbled in a voice that made the walls shake. So the debt collector returns, he said. Did you come for another ride on our trash shuttle? Rex did not flinch. He stood in the center of the chamber and spoke with calm defiance. I came for answers, not trash. You erased your debts with the help of someone on Earth. Tell me who. The Don laughed, a sound like rocks grinding. You still do not understand, human. We do not owe you anything. It is your people who owe us. Rex frowned, caught off guard. Crocker leaned forward, slime dripping from his folds. Your government asked us to bury the debts. They came to us, cap in hand, begging us to hide their weakness. You are not here to collect. You are here to cover up their shame. The words struck Rex harder than any blow. He had suspected corruption, but hearing it from the mouth of the syndicate's leader twisted his gut. For a moment, the room tilted, as if the galaxy itself had shifted. His mission had never been about money. It had been about silence. The government wanted him to play the fool, chasing ghosts while they sat safely behind closed doors. Before Rex could speak, chaos erupted. A rival gang within the syndicate staged an ambush, storming the throne room with blasters firing. Guards fell, the walls cracked, and smoke filled the chamber. In the chaos, Rex dove behind a fallen column. Mira pulled a pistol from her boot and fought beside him, her earlier betrayal forgotten in the desperate scramble for survival. In the middle of the firefight, Rex noticed something strange. One of the attackers, a young gangster with 4 arms and nervous eyes, was aiming to miss. He fired wide, deliberately avoiding Rex. Then, when no one was watching, he gestured subtly for Rex to follow. It was an invitation. After the ambush, with the palace in ruins and Crocker roaring in fury, Rex slipped away and found the young gangster waiting in a side corridor. The alien introduced himself as Sylph, voice trembling but determined. "I am tired of this life," he said. "Crocker has enslaved us all, and now he plans something worse." Rex narrowed his eyes, suspicion written on his face. "Why help me?" Sylph looked away, shame etched across his features. "Because you saved me back there. You could have shot me, but you didn't." "I owe you?" Rex almost laughed. Another debt. At least this was one he might actually collect. With Sylph's help, Rex began to see the syndicate from the inside out. He learned of a plan so dangerous it made the missing debts look like pocket change. The syndicate intended to destroy a planet, not for conquest but to erase every record of their dealings, every shred of evidence of corruption. Wipe the slate clean in fire. Rex felt the weight of the deadline pressing heavier than ever. 72 hours was no longer just about repayment. It was about stopping a crime that could rewrite the galaxy. He glanced at Mira, who stood beside him, silent and uneasy. She had betrayed him once, but now she too understood the stakes. The volcanic moon burned like a furnace beneath its blackened sky, rivers of molten rock winding between jagged ridges that seemed to scrape at the stars. From the highest tower of Don Crocker's stronghold, Rex could see the glow of industry spread across the horizon. It was not industry meant to build cities or fleets. It was destruction masked as progress. Sylph had been right. The syndicate was preparing something catastrophic, something large enough to scorch history clean. The deeper Rex looked into their files with Myra's help, the clearer the picture became. The syndicate was constructing a weapon designed to shatter an entire planet, not for war but to erase all records. Wipe out an entire archive world and no one could ever prove the debts existed. It was not about money anymore. It was about power, and about rewriting the galaxy's memory with fire. Sylph explained the plan in whispers as the 3 of them hid in the ruins of a half-collapsed corridor. The syndicate had been funneling stolen star cores into a massive device buried in the moon's crust. Once activated, the weapon would fire a chain reaction that tore through a chosen planet's core, splitting it apart in minutes. The target was an archive planet known as Serenith, a world filled with libraries and data towers that held centuries of records. Serenith was the keeper of debts, treaties, and contracts. If it was destroyed, no one could ever prove who owed what. Humanity's claim against the syndicate would vanish like smoke. Rex clenched his fists until his knuckles went white. They were going to destroy an entire world just to avoid paying. He muttered that it was the most expensive form of theft he had ever seen. The problem was that the syndicate was already testing smaller versions of the weapon. Mira had intercepted reports of collapsing asteroids across nearby systems. Every failure had cost hundreds of lives, but the syndicate did not care. They treated lives like loose change scattered across a bar counter. Rex knew he had no chance of stopping the weapon with force alone. His ship was a wreck, his weapons barely enough to take down a squad, and his allies were a data thief who had betrayed him once and a young gangster who looked like he might faint whenever a gun fired too close. Still, Rex had never believed in impossible odds. If the front door was locked, he would simply knock it down with his head. His first idea was madness even by his own standards. He decided to infiltrate the syndicate by pretending to join them. Mira told him he was insane. Sylph told him it was suicide. Rex replied that insanity and suicide were often the only doors left open when the galaxy shut the others. With Sylph's reluctant coaching, he disguised himself in stolen robes, painted his skin with crude markings, and wrapped his face in a visor stolen from a guard. The plan was to pass as a minor recruit who had survived the ambush in the throne room. Rex grumbled that the disguise made him look like a rejected extra from a cheap space opera, but Mira told him to shut up and act like he belonged. The initiation ritual was worse than either of them had warned. The syndicate gathered in a cavern carved into the moon's crust, torches burning with green flames that smelled of sulfur. New recruits were led to a long table where steaming bowls of writhing creatures were placed. Venomous worms, still alive, twitching and snapping as they were forced down throats. It was called the Feast of Venomous Worms, and it was less about loyalty than about humiliation. Rex stared into the bowl, the worms coiling like living ropes, and muttered under his breath that he would rather eat his boots. Mira, watching from a hidden vantage point, whispered over the calm that if he hesitated, he would be exposed. So Rex did what any desperate man would do. He raised the bowl, pretended to chew, and while the crowd roared approval, he discreetly spat the wriggling creatures into a concealed pocket of his coat. The taste lingered anyway, a burning chemical bitterness that made his stomach churn. Somehow, he passed the test. The syndicate welcomed him with raucous laughter, slapping him on the back hard enough to bruise. For the next 2 days, he shadowed their operations, listening carefully and memorizing every detail. He saw shipments of star cores delivered in bulk, crates stacked taller than buildings, each one capable of powering fleets or annihilating cities. He watched technicians splice the cores together, weaving them into the weapon hidden deep below the moon's surface. What horrified him most was how casual it all was. To the syndicate, destroying a planet was simply business. They joked while they worked, drank while they armed the weapon, and bet credits on which world would be targeted first after Serenith. Rex felt something burning inside him that was not just anger but a deep disgust for how cheaply the galaxy treated lives. Meanwhile, Mira worked her magic from a remote terminal, hacking deeper into their network. She found blueprints, activation codes, and a countdown timer. The weapon would be ready in less than 48 hours. The tension between her and Rex grew heavier with each hour. She confronted him late one night as he returned from a syndicate briefing. "You know I betrayed you once," she said quietly, "and you still trust me to handle this." He looked at her with tired eyes and answered, "I don't trust you, Mira. I just don't have anyone else." For a moment she looked wounded, then she smirked. "Fair enough. Just so you know, if I do betray you again, it'll be for more than safety. It'll be for a kingdom." Rex chuckled humorlessly. "Then I'll just have to take the kingdom back." Their uneasy alliance was tested sooner than expected. One of the syndicate captains grew suspicious of Rex, noting that he asked too many questions and spent too much time near restricted areas. The captain arranged for Rex to accompany a convoy into the asteroid belt under the guise of testing loyalty. What followed was not a test but a trap. As their ships moved through the belt, the captain turned his guns on Rex's vessel, broadcasting to the others that the newcomer was a spy. Blaster fire erupted, asteroids shattered under the blasts, and Rex found himself piloting a half-dead ship through a hailstorm of burning rock. He fought like a man possessed, dodging boulders while cursing Mira for ever letting him wear the disguise. Just as the captain closed in for the kill, Sylph struck. The young gangster, hidden aboard the convoy, turned his guns on his own people, blasting the captain's ship into debris. For the first time, Rex saw not fear but fire in Sylph's eyes. The escape left Rex's ship battered and barely functional, but alive. As they limped back to the outskirts of the system, Rex realized the syndicate now knew he was a spy. There would be no second disguise, no clever infiltration. From now on, every step forward would be open war. Mira finished decrypting the last of the files and revealed the final truth. The weapon was not only real, it was ready. All that remained was for Don Crocker to give the order, and Serenith would become dust. Rex sat in the cockpit, ribs aching, head pounding, staring out at the stars. He had 72 hours when he began. Now he had less than 2 days. The galaxy wanted him to give up, but all it had done was give him more reason to fight. He lit a cigarette, the smoke curling into the stale air, and said quietly to himself, "They think they can erase history. Then I'll just have to make myself unforgettable." The countdown began with a whisper, not a roar. Myra's decrypted files revealed a sequence buried deep in the Syndicate's system, a timer already ticking. Don Crocker had set the weapon to charge, and in 24 hours the planet Serenith would be nothing but fragments scattered across the void. Rex sat in the cockpit, staring at the numbers crawling across the screen, each second falling like a hammer. The silence in the ship was thick, broken only by the wheeze of the engines and Zilf's nervous breathing. Rex lit a cigarette, inhaled deeply, and muttered that 24 hours was more than enough to ruin somebody's day. Mira shook her head at his bravado, but her hands moved fast across the console, rerouting signals and forging access codes. They were running against a clock that would not stop for courage or jokes. Their only chance was to strike at the weapon before it reached full power. The Syndicate had buried it beneath the volcanic moon's surface, protected by layers of shielding and guarded by entire squads of brutes. To get close, they would need to ride a supply convoy down into the heart of the stronghold. Mira proposed hijacking one of the automated transports, sneaking in among crates of star cores. Rex raised an eyebrow and said he had never been fond of hiding in boxes, but he would make an exception for planetary survival. Sylph, pale and shaking, volunteered to guide them through the interior defenses. He knew the layout better than anyone, having grown up in the belly of the Syndicate's empire. For the first time Rex saw not just fear but a trace of resolve in the young gangster's face. They made their move under the cover of chaos. A skirmish between rival gangs had erupted on the moon's surface, giving them a thin window to slip inside without drawing immediate attention. Rex, Mira, and Zilf squeezed into a transport pod, the hum of the engines rattling their bones as it descended into the heat. The air grew hotter and heavier, the walls glowing faintly from the magma beyond. When the pod finally stopped, they stepped out into a cavern lit by machinery and flames. The weapon loomed before them like a god of destruction, a spire of twisted steel and glowing cores reaching toward the ceiling. The energy pulsing through it vibrated in Rex's chest, an ominous heartbeat counting down to annihilation. The infiltration did not last long before alarms blared. Syndicate guards swarmed the cavern, rifles glowing. Mira cursed and dove for cover, her fingers dancing across a portable console to jam communications. Zilf fired wildly, his hands trembling but his shots striking true enough to drop 2 guards. Rex charged straight into the fray, swinging a stolen rifle like a club, smashing helmets and cracking jaws. For all their size and strength, the gangsters had never fought a man like him. He fought dirty, using every cheap trick he had learned in a lifetime of alley fights and bar brawls. A kick to the knees, a headbutt to the snout, a blaster swung in an arc wide enough to send 3 collapsing at once. Mira shouted at him to move faster, and Rex yelled back that he was improvising. In the chaos, they reached the base of the weapon. Mira connected her console, sweat dripping from her brow as she worked to override the activation sequence. She explained quickly that the weapon had multiple safeguards, including one that required direct authorization from Don Crocker. Without his biometric code, they could only delay the firing, not stop it entirely. Rex swore under his breath. That meant they would have to reach Crocker himself, and the thought of facing the slug-like crime lord in his own throne room felt like stepping into a bear's den with a broken stick. But the clock was still ticking, and Rex had never been good at ignoring clocks. The fight spilled into the tunnels above the cavern. Rex and Zilf covered Mira as she carried the console with her, still connected to the weapon's systems. Syndicate brutes stormed in from every side, and the 3 of them fought like cornered animals, each step a struggle. At one point Rex slipped on molten rock, nearly falling into a fissure, but Zilf grabbed his arm and pulled him back. The look in the young gangster's eyes was different now, steadier, hardened by choice. Rex realized in that moment that Sylph was no longer just a frightened recruit. He was a man making a stand. Together they forced their way upward, closer to the palace where Crocker waited. The palace was chaos. Rival factions were still fighting in the corridors, turning the stronghold into a war zone. Rex used the confusion to push forward, shoving aside anyone in his way. He cracked jokes even as blaster bolts sizzled past his ears. When one hulking alien lunged at him, Rex spat out the cigarette dangling from his mouth and growled that he would rather deal with debt collectors than babysit oversized lizards. Then he swung the butt of his rifle into the creature's skull and kept running. Mira rolled her eyes at his commentary but could not hide a grin. Even in the heart of hell, Rex had a way of making disaster feel like a bad comedy routine. When they finally burst into the throne room, Don Crocker was waiting. The slug-like lord sat bloated on his throne, smoke curling from his cigar, eyes glowing with smug amusement. Around him stood his elite guards, their weapons trained on Rex and his companions. The Don's voice gurgled through the chamber, slow and cruel. "You should have died in the trash where I left you, human. Now you crawl back again and again, like a fly begging to be swatted." Rex wiped blood from his brow and smiled crookedly. "Funny thing about flies," he said. "We bite." The Don snarled, his massive bulk shifting forward. "You came for debts, but what you'll get is death." Before the order to fire could be given, Mira interrupted, holding up her console. She had intercepted the weapon's activation link. With the right code, she explained, they could redirect the firing sequence. Rex looked at Crocker, then back at Mira. All they needed was the Don's biometric key. Rex grinned, cracked his knuckles, and muttered that it sounded like the start of a very bad negotiation. The guards closed in, but Rex moved first. He charged at Crocker, dodging blaster fire and hurling himself across the chamber. The impact was like hitting a wall of slime and armor, but he clung on, shoving the scanner Mira had thrown at him against Crocker's arm. The machine beeped, registering the slug's massive print before Rex was hurled across the room. The throne room erupted into chaos again, blasters firing, guards screaming. Sylph turned his weapon on Crocker's elites, fighting with the fury of a man finally free of chains. Mira screamed at Rex to hold on as she fed the biometric data into her console. The weapon's countdown froze for a moment, then resumed at half speed. It was not enough. The Don roared in fury, his slimy arms flailing as he demanded his guards tear the intruders apart. Rex staggered to his feet, coughing blood, and shouted back over the noise. "You want debts, Crocker? Here's one you'll never pay. Humanity's been your fool long enough." He raised his rifle and fired, not at Crocker but at the ceiling above, sending slabs of rock crashing down. The throne room shook, smoke and fire filling the air. Rex Dalton had never been a man for speeches, but as the escape tunnel rattled around him and the console in Myra's arms continued to show the relentless countdown, he realized words mattered now as much as bullets. The Syndicate's palace behind them was crumbling, fires licking at the night sky of the volcanic moon, yet the roar of Don Crocker still echoed through the stone. It was not the roar of defeat but of rage, the kind of sound that promised this fight was not yet over. They stumbled into the hangar where Rex's battered ship waited, its hull scorched and engines coughing smoke, and for a moment Rex almost laughed. Humanity's last hopes sat on 3 bent legs and leaked coolant like a drunk spilling ale. But it was all they had, so Rex climbed aboard and told the others to hold on. They lifted off into the sky, ash swirling around them, while the timer continued to eat away at the future. The problem was simple and brutal. The weapon would fire in less than 12 hours. Myra's temporary override had slowed the countdown, but Crocker would not sit idle. He would find another way to force the weapon online. The biometric code they had stolen bought them time, but time was slipping like sand. Sylph suggested abandoning the mission, fleeing to another system and leaving Serenith to its fate. He argued that one planet was not worth their lives, that survival mattered more than debts. Rex shook his head and lit another cigarette, his voice low but steady as he answered. "Some debts are bigger than us. If we run, we're just proving them right about humans being weak. I'd rather go down swinging than watch history get burned away." Mira listened silently, eyes glinting with something between admiration and fear. Rex knew there was only one path left. He had to face Don Crocker directly, not as a spy or a saboteur but as himself, a human debt collector standing against the galaxy's biggest criminal. If Crocker controlled the syndicate, then breaking him meant breaking the weapon too. But the human government had other ideas. A new transmission came through, this time more desperate and more cruel. "Abort the mission," the voice commanded. "Return immediately. Do not interfere further. You have done enough damage." Rex stared at the message in silence before smashing the comm with his fist. He had heard enough lies from his own people. They had hired him to cover their shame, and now they wanted him dead to bury it completely. He muttered that he was finished playing errand boy for cowards. The final approach was madness. Rex, Mira, and Zilf flew straight back to the Syndicate's stronghold, not sneaking, not hiding, but tearing through the sky with weapons firing. Alarms blared across the moon as ships scrambled to intercept them. Rex piloted like a man possessed, weaving through blaster fire while Mira manned the guns and Zilf barked directions. Explosions lit the air as Syndicate fighters fell one by one, until the battered ships slammed down onto the palace's roof with a screech of tearing metal. They stumbled out into smoke and fire, and Rex kicked the ruined hatch closed behind him. The throne room was only a few corridors away, and he planned to walk into it without hesitation. The guards tried to stop them, but exhaustion had stripped Rex of fear. He fought with the desperation of a man who knew he had only hours left. Every punch landed like a hammer, every shot carried the weight of defiance. Mira hacked doors open with seconds to spare, locking them behind her to slow the pursuers. Zilf fought like a man determined to rewrite his own life, blasting aside the very Syndicate soldiers he had once called brothers. When they finally burst into the throne room, Don Crocker was waiting again, his massive bulk looming larger than before, his eyes burning with fury. Smoke curled from his cigar as he rose from his throne. "You just don't know when to die, human," he gurgled. Rex grinned through bloody teeth and spat his cigarette on the floor. "Funny thing," he said. "I came here to collect, not to die." The battle that followed was not elegant. It was brutal, raw, and loud. Crocker lunged forward, his massive arms slamming the stone floor as Rex dove aside. Guards rushed in, only to be cut down by Zilf, who fought with reckless courage. Mira scrambled to connect her console to the weapons system again, screaming that she needed more time. Rex faced Crocker head-on, dodging blows that could have crushed him flat. He fired his rifle point-blank into the Don's slimy hide, but the creature only roared and swatted him across the chamber like a rag doll. Pain exploded in Rex's ribs, but he dragged himself up again, refusing to stay down. He remembered his father's words, "Debts are chains, and the people who refuse to pay are thieves in crowns." Rex spat blood and muttered that it was time to break some crowns. In the chaos, Rex realized brute strength would never defeat Crocker. The Don was too massive, too powerful. But the Syndicate itself was cracking. Zilf had rallied some of the younger gangsters, disillusioned with Crocker's rule. They stormed the throne room, turning their weapons on their former master. Crocker bellowed in rage, striking down his own men, but the tide was shifting. Mira shouted that she had done it, that the weapons firing sequence was no longer under the Don's control. With the biometric key and the broadcast system, she had hijacked the console. Rex saw his chance. He climbed the broken steps to the throne, standing face to face with Crocker. The slug-like lord glared at him with venom. "You cannot kill me, human. I am the debt you will never collect." Rex smiled crookedly and whispered back. "The thing about debts, Crocker, is that sooner or later someone knocks to collect. And today, that someone is me." With that, he slammed the scanner against Crocker's chest, forcing a final override. The weapons countdown froze, then collapsed into shutdown. The archives of Serenith were safe. Crocker howled in fury, but his own men were turning against him, spurred by Zilf's defiance. The throne room erupted into civil war, syndicate against syndicate, until the great crime lord's empire collapsed in the very room he thought untouchable. Rex staggered down the steps, his body broken but his spirit burning. Mira grabbed his arm, dragging him toward the exit as explosions ripped through the palace. Zil stayed behind, rallying the defectors, shouting that the syndicate would no longer bow to Crocker. They escaped into the night sky just as the palace crumbled into the molten pits below. From the cockpit, Rex watched the towers fall, the weapon buried forever under fire and ash. Mira slumped into a chair, exhausted but grinning. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually collected." Rex lit one last cigarette, the glow reflecting in his weary eyes. "Not money," he said softly. "Something better. Respect. Freedom." Mira looked at him curiously, but he said nothing more. He was thinking of his father, of humanity, of all the debts written in blood and sweat. For once, they were not the ones running. They were the ones who knocked, and the galaxy had answered.